All right, if everything is working, technically we should be live. I don't know why, but Rumble is lagging. And I'm always like, is it live? Is it going? Is it okay on Rumble? And then I look and suddenly it starts showing up on the Rumble window like 20 seconds in. So strange lag. Have a great panel coming today. Not everybody is here immediately. As is the typical form of Legal Fridays. People come in, people go out. People have kids, people have chores. So Nate, I think, will be here in a few minutes, but we're going to start out now with Sean and Steve, Southern Law. And I could just say Steve now and not specify to whom I'm addressing. I want to open, though. A verdict just came in. And I don't know. I think both of you may have been covering it to some degree. I think, Steve, you actually were monitoring the trial a little bit. Sean, were you as well? This is the Whitmer kidnapping.
I was actually monitoring it through Radix Verum. She's been out there and she's been following it all from the start. And she was actually out there attending the trial. So I've been following her Twitter on that.
Okay. Yeah. And by the way, we got into a spat there, and that might be a good subject, too. Not a spat with Radix Verum, but Radix Verum has had a spat with some local station that somehow claims that they got exclusive streaming rights to the trial and spiked her feed. I questioned it and I put it out to the lawyers, that I know, some of them, Barnes Law, et cetera, and then somebody came in saying, I've been doing copyright law for 30 years. She must comply. And I want to ask you guys on that note, and I know this is a sidetrack, but what are your thoughts on that? I know Barnes is saying that it's absolute rubbish. I think even Nate agrees that you can't limit or have an exclusive access to a public trial. Do you guys have any opinions or thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not a copyright expert, but I would say I certainly agree with that sentiment. And I think, just like if you go to a basketball game, it's not the basketball game that gets the copyright. It's the recording of it and the creative element of that. Mm-hmm. And if you're just showing a witness on the stand per where the court tells you to put the camera and all that, then where's the creative aspect of that, right? Because the underlying public trial is public. Okay, that's not a creative work by the station. And if it's the station I'm thinking about, isn't that all they were doing was just streaming where the courtroom said this can be streamed like this and then sticking their logo down in the corner. So, and it also could depend on the court's order. And I wouldn't want to necessarily be a station that's telling the court that we're the only people allowed to show this public trial and try to make money off of it. So that's been a battle that's been had by bigger channels than I am in terms of law and crime and court TV. And I think really they just have decided to back off of that whole concept and try and create the most appealing streams they can, right, of these public events. So if you're going to, because you're the pool photographer, like when I look at the Koberger orders on media, the judge writes on their pool. That's what he writes on there. So I assume that means multiple stations can cover it. So how can any station say, well, my stream is the special stream, unless they're doing some creative work with it, have their commentator on there or something like that, and maybe you're hijacking that or something like that.
Yeah, and I agree with that. If they're breaking into commentary or saying, well, Pete, what do you say about, and then you're broadcasting, that would be a problem. But the trial itself, especially if you're adding commentary. Go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, I agree with Steve as well. And I think this is still an issue of courts not fully appreciating the idea that, they weren't necessarily thinking this is an exclusive thing. It's whatever, whoever's ever filming it. Okay, yeah, you're filming it. And I think that it's, some courts are savvy to this, saying that nobody retains the rights. The court retains the rights to this. You're merely just, airing this for everyone to see. I think that's more of the issue there. It's just that courts are not catching up to that. And I think going forward, I think it's going to become, upon us to, as people wanting to comment and watch on this, figuring out like how to get a motion from the court saying, is this open to everybody who actually retains the rights in some situations to, address these matters going forward in the future?
And then I think you have a second level, and correct me if I'm wrong, of the whole fair use argument. Because if you were critiquing and commenting on a public trial, that to me would be yet another addition, because fair use is literally put in place, from what I understand, for the purposes of critique and commentary, etc.
And that's another issue too. But yeah, once again, it's another layer of something to wrap yourself in protection wise. And the funny thing is, Court TV and all these other groups, it's not like they're not going to. It's not like they're going to stop filming these because people are, using their feeds. They're in existence to do this anyway, so they're still going to go ahead and do it. So I know I was reading, I forget who it was worried about, well, if they can't, have the exclusive rights, they'll quit doing it. I'm like, that's not going to happen. People want to see this stuff. Somebody will make money off of it regardless.
Well, let's say I wanted to stream a big time movie, right? So I pirate the movie down and then I put it on, or I don't pirate, maybe I buy one copy, but I broadcast it on YouTube and and then I talk a little bit during it. It's a stretch for me to call that fair use, but when you have a public trial like you're talking about and the station's not commenting, like Court TV may show us something, Law and Crime, or this station, Great North or whatever they are, they're just broadcasting the witnesses talking. There is no real creative aspect there. It's not like they're framing the shot and doing all the stuff. The court has basically controlled how and what gets broadcast. So to me, there's very little, or really no creative content there that you could be hijacking or taking away. So to me, that kind of expands the fair use thing, that you're the only one creating something as you're commenting on the trial, because the rest of it is just public stuff. And there's more than one way to see it, of course. I know some people are saying there should be clear rules, but the law is often not clear. And some judges clear it up more by saying this is going to be pulled. People can do what they want, but the judge doesn't care if after that happens, if some station is mad at a YouTube user. But in this case, I think they struck her channel, but I'm not aware that they struck anybody else's channel that were showing streams from that. And I did it for a few days when I could. And other channels have also shown things out of that, and I didn't hear anything from them.
Well, I think it's because she's known. She did a documentary, I believe, on the case. Is probably involved with the different people. So some of this might be some personal vendetta, and that's another question. Okay, your example, I can definitely take to heart, Steve, about, a movie, you have a copy of a movie, and then you stream it, and you comment occasionally on it. I don't think that's quite the same thing, especially because the movie is a work of art that is created for the express purpose of selling it. And a trial is not something you're selling, I hope. I mean, there are accusations
or even creating. They're not even creating it.
Right. It is an event that is occurring, but it's not a sports event or anything like that. It is actually, it's the opposite of for money, I pray. And to say that, well, whose money are you taking? The taxpayers? You as a taxpayer are broadcasting this event that is supposed to be a public event for people to see the justice system in action and things like that. So I just feel like on so many levels. Now, the movie example, I can hold up to it, because if I watch the movie and you are just commenting every once in a while, Steve, well, now I'm not going to go rent the movie. I've already seen it, because now you've taken everything away from it. So I don't think they're quite the same. Sean, what do you think? Sean's muted.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Did you guys just reference me? I had to look away for a second.
Yeah, no worries. We'll just go on. It was just a comment on that. So, okay, I'm going to go to another question then. I feel like that station, in my opinion, is abusing the YouTube copyright system. And what they're doing is, even if Radix Verum, or I think her name's Christine, even should she prevail, even should she prevail, she's already lost the value of what she was doing. So they're just stalling, and then it takes a couple of weeks, et cetera, to overcome that copyright. All the value is completely gone. And I think that there needs to be some kind of recourse, because people are intentionally doing this, spiking channels using the copyright system, and YouTube makes it very easy and, automatically sides on the copyright holder if they, allegedly, and it harms the creator who's being honest. And I feel like if it can be proven that they know this, or it's clear enough that there needs to be a little bit of recourse. Like, if you're going to do a copyright claim and you're not going to go to court, or you're not going to fulfill it, or you really don't have a valid one, I think you should be fined. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know that YouTube cares enough to get involved to help people like that, but I agree with you. And where I first ran into this was a Darrell Brooks trial. So I would put up a feed and comment during it, and then later on, a couple days later, I get some copyright thing. But unlike this case that you're talking about, where apparently it is at least the station that was broadcasting it, I was getting a copyright claim from like, what the hell entity is this? And I think some other attorneys have seen that too. And so you can't even tell, is that the state? Yeah. Is that even the station that broadcasts it? So I think there are some people setting up, whatever name of an account that maybe is vaguely media sounding, and then they make copyright claims on enough people, and then they accumulate the money from those people, even though they had no right. Because I could see that and go, well, that's not even the original station that broadcast the stuff. Like, this wasn't law and crime. This is some thing that's named something somewhere else, and yet they're making a claim against me.
Oh, I've had that happen actually with a preview. Plandemic 3, we played the trailer for that, right? And I think it's Brian Rose. He's not the filmmaker, not involved. Mickey Willis, who we interviewed because we raised hell about it on Twitter, saying, how dare you do a copyright claim on our video when we are sharing a trailer? The whole purpose of the trailer is to get people to watch your movie. That's beyond asinine. It's insulting. And you're going to take the revenue from our stream. And they didn't get any revenue, but you know what? Neither did we, because we have to wait several hours for that edit in YouTube to cut out that portion. Meanwhile, we lost all the ad dollars throughout the evening. And it may not be a lot to, many people, but I'm talking about close to 20,000 views of ads. That's actual money to me. It's a lot. So that pisses me off. And Brian Rose has nothing to do with it. So I'm glad you brought that up. There should be a next level restitution or punishment for people who are, to me, falsely even claiming any kind of ownership.
Well, and the way you get around when you make, these, it's punishing people for fraudulent activity, they can say, oops, we made a mistake. And then, it's hard to prove that, sorry, we're just idiots. And I think that's where, you'll get a lot of people coming around with that. I had a trial once where we were waiting for the jury, and it was just this like black screen with like the screensaver coming on from the people that were airing it. And I got copyrighted from some like, New Zealand rugby thing. And it was just a black screen for like 3 or 4 minutes.
Yes.
And obviously that was done by software. The stars are that did bad.
You're roboting really bad, but you're roboting terribly.
Well,
but I guess you didn't realize that the New Zealand club owns copyrights to all black screens.
They play at night. That's why.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's go back to the original point. Verdict came in, and guess what? Not guilty on all counts.
So that was a surprise to me, just because it seemed like, the kind of, I hate to use the phrase, the fix was in, but I think people thought they would be convicted, and they were not. None of them were. None of the three. So that was interesting.
I find it actually encouraging. I look for these subtle signs that the tide may be turning if you will, politically and culturally, especially. I think that culturally the tide is definitely turning, and the Bud Light case is going to be seen as one of the important harbingers. But there was so much FBI chicanery involved with that whole Whitmer kidnapping between informants and everything else. From what I understand, you guys have covered it more than I do. I feel like maybe, just maybe, people are starting to see the things don't smell right here. They just don't smell right.
What's interesting is the way that entrapment law is handled in that state. I don't think they were allowed to really pursue that at all, because it's more of a legal defense and not one to put in front of the jury. So the jury came to the not guilty conclusion without a real strong entrapment kind of defense presentation. I didn't see the closing arguments, but I assume that must be what happened. So I would agree with you, Eric, that the jury must have sensed, I don't think so. There's too much government involvement in all this. I don't put it on these guys.
Yeah. And, Jim Satala said the judge told the jury entrapment's not for them to decide.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's not in that state, though. I mean, it is in some states, but the law is different in different places. It's not even like that in federal court in that state.
Which, think about that for a minute. What? I mean, does that seem logical to you? It's like, oh, you know what? Whether or not they were convicted or caught on false grounds doesn't matter. Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. That seems a little too state friendly. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's factual issues. So my preference would be the fact finder decide the fact issues, and you put it out there in elements the same way you do the crime, right? Why do we have special defenses that the jury doesn't decide that the judge does? So, it's different if it's a technicality, but entrapment has fact issues in it, but it's how that state decides to operate. Having said that, the jury reached this conclusion without it. So that's pretty interesting, because the state had that extra bonus going for them of this weird kind of procedure, and they still lost the case, which they rarely lose, right? The state controls who they prosecute, how they prosecute, so they rarely lose.
Well, and that makes me think that, I hate to say it, the jury probably is more aware of the rumblings in the press, so to speak, or whatever press there is. I think they could smell something's just not right here. Something's just not right. And
they must have. It'll be interesting to see if any of them do any interviews. I would like to hear what they say.
And what are your thoughts on that? Because I know Robert Barnes, for example, is a huge proponent for the court of public opinion. And I would say that this is one of those cases where I believe he and others have all spoke out saying this is wrong, this is BS, this is this is that. That does get out into people's mind where the jurors may have heard something. And I know everybody's, supposedly looking for the juror who's, deaf, dumb, and blind, who has been on the farm for 2 years and never turned on the radio or read a newspaper. But that's impossible, isn't it?
Well, I think it is impossible, and you're not really gonna get that. But it's one thing to have heard of it, and another thing to think, well, I believe everything I hear. And so if you're going to be a fair juror, you go on the jury and you say, I'm going to listen to what the judge has to say, tell me the rules, and then I'm going to listen to the witnesses and the attorneys, and I'm going to make the decision according to whatever this case actually is. Because social media and media in general is often incomplete, sometimes wrong, and sometimes intentionally wrong. I'm not talking about Barnes there, but I'm talking about, if you read a news article about this case, you're only going to get a tiny fragment of what the information is pro or for these guys. And then sometimes it's wrong, and sometimes people don't know what the legal rules are. So best to go with what is presented in the courtroom, but it's seeping in through the ether, Eric, like you're talking about, that Robert's talking about. How can that not be real, right? The zeitgeist, right? It's affected people sometimes getting convicted when maybe you think the law didn't support it. Why can't it go the other way and maybe get some people off when you're like, well, the state thought they had a shoe in, the jury didn't agree.
Yeah, and I find that encouraging. I mean, I understand the idea of the impartial jury, but people have written about that before. That if they really got the supposed juror they wanted, they might not be competent enough to be on the jury, because who is so blissfully unaware of everything? I guess somebody who works 60 hours a week at their job, let's say, and has no time to really consume anything, fair enough. They're probably pretty good. But in general, it's hard to find anybody who hasn't heard.
Well, and the law, the cases don't require that you pick somebody off from a monastery off the side of a mountain who's had a vow of silence for years and never interacted with anybody, and especially in cases with a lot of publicity, right? So having heard some of the news about things is not disqualifying. Otherwise, you get what you say, which are people who, for one reason or the other, are completely disconnected from anything that's happening in society. And is that really a jury of your peers, to 12 people that live out in the woods and never talk to anybody? I mean, that's my kind of people, but that's maybe not fair for people in general.
Okay, here we go. Bucklebrush Jones wants to start things up here. This is an interesting argument. I love hearing it. But every officer pretending to be kid online is entrapment, but if they get predators off the street, we're good. Okay, there is a problem that we've got to face. Now, because an officer mimics a child online doesn't necessarily mean it's entrapment, from what I understand. If they go and they seek somebody out and they say to John Smith, let's say John Smith is online and the cop says, "Hey, I'm little Billy. I want to meet you." Now we're starting to get into entrapment, right? But if Billy just is in a room or just is online and John Smith reaches out to Billy, is that entrapment? Help me with that, Steve.
Well, I think you're right there. And it's kind of, the test is generally that you're creating in the person the desire to do the crime they wouldn't otherwise have. So here's an example. I put the word out on the street that I can get you drugs. Okay. And so if you want to be a small time drug dealer, you come to me, you buy some cocaine, and then you go sell it on the street for more. I didn't create the desire in you to do that. You wanted to do it. But if you're my friend and I tell you, but I'm actually a Fed, look, I really need some help. Can you take this brick of cocaine over to this guy? And I'm going to give you $500, but I need to do it because my son can't afford surgery if I don't make this sale. And you're like, well, I don't really want to sell drugs, and I don't even want the 500. But if it helps your kid get surgery, I'm willing to overlook. Well, that's classic entrapment, right? Like I'm using friendship and an inducement and creating a desire in you to commit a crime that you didn't otherwise have. And that was part of the thing in Michigan. It's like, were the feds telling these people, man, we ought to kidnap somebody, man, we ought to go buy our house? So were they coming up with the ideas versus you logging on and seeking out young kids online? And one of them happens to be a Fed is not by itself entrapment. But Eric, I think you gave a good example of where it might cross the line to that.
Okay, and I actually interviewed a couple days back, and I'll be releasing it on the Eric Hunley channel, the former leader of, I don't know what you call him, but essentially the American Nazi Party. He was there for 25 years. And part of the time, and he's completely disavowed it. He works with the Simon Wiesenthal, or I think that's how you say it, organization. So he's completely out of it, but it's still interesting because I like to explore hate and how people get there. But we talked about that, and I asked him about this exact issue, because there's the old running joke that if you get 3 KKK people together or 3 Nazis together, the odds are 1 to 2 of them are a Fed. And he kind of started laughing about it, but he said yes. And he has talked to people since, he's gotten out of it or whatever, who have confessed it. And here's a case of it. One of these people who got recruited into another hate group, not his, apparently his hate group pissed the guy off too much to join that hate group. So he chose another hate group. I didn't know that there was, it was like going shopping. Like, I'm going to go to this hate store versus that hate store. But apparently, these people are recruiting. There's competition. Cool, whatever. But this guy in this other hate group had said, hey, we should take these, we should get guns and do blah, 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 blah. Right? Just talking out his ass. And there were some other people in the hate group who said, here, I'll help you get some guns. And they got him some guns. And then he went to prison. And this guy I interviewed, Shoop, said, would you have carried out anything? And the guy's like, no, I wouldn't have done anything. They encouraged me, et cetera, et cetera. I'm guilty, blah, blah, blah. I said it. but I wouldn't have done it. So I'm curious. I have a feeling that it's not technically entrapment. I think it's very borderline, but I would be curious both of your views on this of, is that in fact entrapment, or is it kind of a gray area where it's probably legal, but you wonder.
All right, Joe.
Wow.
Hey, Joe, before you take off, because I know you will, I have watching this chat, but paying close attention to Eric. And Joe must have put one banger of a show on last night. This is why I hate being old, not being able to stay up late. I wish I said, look at the chat, says your show was awesome, Joe.
Oh, well,
now I'm going to I got to go watch it tonight.
Nice.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, last night I had on my father and Steve Gosney, and I was talking with them about the video of those Orthodox Jewish kids harassing a woman in Jerusalem, and giving my perspectives on that, which was a bit of a hot take, because I do think that what they were doing, I think that what they were doing was awful, terrible. What those kids were doing was awful and terrible. But I also came to the opinion that her presence there was almost trolling them and baiting them for that reaction so that she could post it online. So, which that doesn't excuse their behavior. You know, they're not, you shouldn't treat anyone like that. My kids would never act that way. I never acted that way. You know, I think that's embarrassing. It is rightfully embarrassing to Orthodox Jews. But that behavior, that was, so I was having this discussion with them, and after my father left, actually, I had a whole religious conversation with Steve about religion, which was a really interesting conversation. So I highly recommend. With respect to entrapment, so I'm not a criminal defense attorney. The guy who just joined here certainly would know far better than I would. Probably Steve would defer to him as well. But I'll tell you that first and foremost, entrapment cannot be claimed if you've shown a propensity for the crime in the past, anytime in your past. So, you know, a lot of people a lot of times when we see something where we say, wow, that guy was totally entrapped, under American law, entrapment is completely legal as long as it doesn't lead to outrageous misconduct by the government, which is like crazy high level, like scaring you into like you're gonna die unless you go commit this crime kind of entrapment. But where that line of entrapment is, the last time I looked at this really was like second year law school, you know, like actually first year when I was doing my legal briefs, and I was looking at that line of where, at what point does something become, you know, suggesting versus, you know, I guess baiting or trolling them into it to the point that, you know, that they never would have done it without your assistance, which is that's my recollection as to what entrapment is. I assume we were talking about the Michigan defendants over here.
Well, no, I was actually naming a specific case that's not the Michigan defendants, but okay. I laid out the case as it was shared to me.
Yeah, if Steve has additional thoughts on that, I want to get back to your hate groups and stuff after he gives his legal perspective on entrapment. But yeah.
Well, and I think, like you say, when Sean comes back, he can give us the most up-to-date version of it. But Joe, like, you know, every jurisdiction may have a little tweak on it. If you're creating the propensity for the crime by your behavior as the government, you are approaching that line. You're cajoling them into it. You're creating the mental mindset. You're not just agreeing with it or maybe providing them an avenue, but you're causing them to do it, kind of a sort of a thing.
But I'm wondering, I'm sure there's a technical legal phrase for when they've crossed that line before entrapment. In other words, that the element of like what determination is, and that's where if Sean's able to stay here for more than 14 seconds.
I don't know. Sean has the worst equipment ever. It's almost a tradition on the show.
My God, I feel like I'm sliding back and forth here, like I'm a goalie in a hockey rink or something. It's like, oh no, he's coming up the right side. Sean, are you here? No, he's not here.
Okay, well, cool.
All right. Well, anyway, I wanted to ask you on that whole hate group thing. Did you see that news story about the Canadian Anti-Hate Network this week? Eric?
Sorry. Well, I know David's doing a stream about it today. Viva.
Oh yeah, that's right. With Jeremy McKenzie. Yeah, with Jeremy McKenzie. and the hate group Diagolon. Did you hear about this at all?
I have no clue. No, I just saw a
hilarious
thumbnail.
It's friggin' hilarious. I have like a 2-minute video. It was put together, I think, by Jeremy McKenzie or one of his associates, which I'm telling you, you will be laughing. Let me just share it with. Let me just pull it up and share it with you. But basically, it's the lengths that the government went to, the Canadian government went to, even invoking Canada's Emergency Powers Act to go after this terrible hate group Diagolon. Terrible hate group, like really evil and vicious hate group. And
the fact you're stressing that so hard, I'm thinking that it's probably a series of grandmothers in a sewing circle, or
it's better than
equivalent.
That. It's better than that. As you'll see in a moment. I'll share the link here with you in the private chat.
Oh, okay, you do it that way then.
Yeah, their story's very interesting. How they got treated.
Yeah, what, the Diagolon?
Yeah.
You have it there.
I'm
for what they've done.
Just a minute.
Who they are.
Yeah, no, it's a 2-minute video, and this is great. This was one of my favorite stories I covered this week.
Also, Eric, is my voice better?
Slightly. Let's see.
Oh, that.
All right, here we go.
I got a story for you. It's a true story.
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act.
Diagolon.
Diagolon.
A far-right extremist group.
We're talking about a group that is organized, driven by an extreme ideology.
A so-called accelerationist group.
Formed by a former member of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Which aims to accelerate racial conflict to lead to the eventual creation of a white ethno-state.
Its stated purpose is, quote, to incite a race war.
Dude, it's over. It's fucking done.
It was a meme.
Are talking about it. Justify a state of emergency.
They're super country. Dude, did we predict this on one of the old fucking streams? Remember?
Pause it there. Go back to that image there. That is, if you go back to that image of the map, that is the country of Diagolon that they're planning on building for a white ethno state.
A diagonal, I guess.
Yes, that's where. So they were making a joke that they're going to make a new country. I actually referred to myself as I don't live in that area, but I'm probably diagonalese.
I'm in it. They picked up North Carolina, so I'm in
you go. There you go. So
they didn't like Ohio.
So Canada went nuts, like in the Canadian government, literally invoking the Emergency Powers Act because of this terrible threat of this hate group that's accelerationist. And accelerationist is a term for that they predict that there's going to be some sort of civil war between people who are on the right and government. And that they're looking, and that's a necessary change, and they're looking to do whatever they can to accelerate that eventuality. That's why they're referred to as accelerationists. I never heard that term before this week, but the reason this story actually that all happened like a year or so ago. But I think the reason it hit the news is because there were FOIA requests or research that was done into how did Canada get to that state that they were so afraid of Diagolon as this, the rising KKK.
That's easy.
What?
Dude, that's easy. I mean, 4chan and 8chan have done this kind of thing forever. I mean, what does that mean?
Well, but this is what it was. There was a group called the Canadian Anti-Hate Networks, or I think the N is for network, or which basically is like in the ADL in Canada, and they basically heard something about Diagolon and wrote up this entire report about Diagolon that the government relied on, and every news agency reporting on it all came back to this one hate group, which basically means that this one hate group does so little checking, so little research, just hears something frightening, and they come out there and they're sounding the alarm bells like Chicken Little about anything, even if it's fictional, and they have such ridiculous levels of influence on the government that Trudeau himself is invoking the Emergency Powers Act. That's the level of impact and influence that these anti-hate groups have, when really they're not any sort of anti-hate group. They're a bunch of reactionaries who are screaming about things that don't even exist, and yet governments sit there and just react to them the way that they do.
So again, How many times did you hear that Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist because he not only met with people in the Proud Boys, but he flashed the OK sign.
Yeah.
The OK sign, YouTube. It's called OK. It's been around since the 1800s, old Kermonic or something like that, back in an election of an ancient president. It's an OK sign, but 4chan, 8chan, they memed it out. All the press does that. Now, what do you think? Do you think that Justin Trudeau is any brighter than anybody else? It's the exact same thing, just a new version of it. I've heard that the OK sign is white power now for a while. Also, remember the sheet of blank paper? Holy cow. It's okay to be white. Remember that on a sheet of paper? And then you have the other ones that have come about.
There was a woman there. Eric, there was a woman in that clip there, which I stopped you before you got to it, who, when she's talking about this group, she's referring to like how they were part of the convoys, the racist convoys, whose slogan was honk honk, which everybody knows is because that's the a acronym. That's a reference to Heil. I thought at first she was saying Hong Kong, but basically as a reference to that, it's a reference to Heil Hitler. So that's what Hong Kong was in the convoy.
HH, right? Yeah. AHH. Dr. D Snuts. I'm trying to get the my volume correct on it. It keeps saying that I'm overpowering the gain, so let me know if it is.
I hear a little popping. I hear a little popping when you're talking.
Is it popping? It's more like a crunchiness. If I'm distorting like an electric guitar is kind of the overmuch gain.
I'm savoring like notes of vanilla and mocha. So
okay.
No, you're talking. I'm talking about popping. You're talking about crunching, and I feel like we're describing like we're writing some catalog here or a wine review.
Maybe. I don't know why. Hopefully this is a little bit better.
All right.
Everybody's saying I'm peaking like crazy. This is driving me nuts because I have the same microphone as Steve there. And Steve, of course, just sounds like, hi, I'm radio announcer Steve.
But I don't think your volume went down, though. I think you're still good. That's how it's coming through to me.
Okay. Does it sound less...
well, everyone sounds
distorted
than Southern, so I can't.
All right. Well, okay. No idea. Anyway, I do agree, Joe. It's hilarious, but I'm saying it's common. This has been going on for a while. Keep in mind that
one group. It's one group. That's the point. When you were talking Kyle Rittenhouse, that was multiple agencies who were all doing these. It was probably like I don't know which groups. Like I'm saying is there's multiple agencies who were all trying to find angles on him. This was one. Everything triangulated back when they did research that every one of them were citing that the same empty report. There's even a Wikipedia entry on Diagolon, which describes them as being this right-wing hate group, which is hilarious.
The Proud Boys itself was made on a joke.
Yeah, the Proud Boys is not real, right? I mean they're a group, but they're not racist, from what I understand.
No, I mean it was created as a joke, and they would quote beat people in over their favorite breakfast cereal. I mean it was Gavin McInnes, who is a prankster, co-founder of Vice magazine, and again that was a joke. Now I don't know, maybe there's some lunatics who are taking it further, but there's a ton of things that people get wrong. Boogaloo Boys. People were like, oh my God, that horrible right-wing group Boogaloo Boys, right?
The Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, the Hawaiian shirts. And they're not right-wing. They're left-wing. They actually did defense support for BLM.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that was a very interesting one when that started, and then very quickly slid down the scale right in the anarcho-communist camp with a bunch of them.
Yeah. Okay. My favorite meme of all possibly is it was either 4chan or 8chan, but they did a thing about celebrating being women by sharing their time of month and not bothering to use hygienic products to hide it. And then people started to actually do it. So people, I don't know. I feel like satire is dead. Satire is dead. I mean, it's something true when you have both the Babylon Bee and not the Bee, and you get confused on the headlines. I'm like, oh, is that a Babylon Bee? Oh no, it's not the Bee. Oh, geez, that means it's real. I mean, we are in a post-satire society, sadly. Joe's still recovering from this.
Oh my God. It's so disturbing. I was just picturing like blood running. He's like seeing like blood seep down the inside of a woman's thigh, like down her leg. Oh my gosh, that's so gross. That is so gross.
Okay, 20th Century Fox. Proud Boys are a joke to you. Again, Proud Boys, the organization
did nothing wrong.
Was created as a joke fraternity by Gavin McInnes. Gavin McInnes is no longer associated with the Proud Boys. It hasn't been for a few years. I don't know their current state at the moment, but I will say the guy in charge of it, who just got sentenced to a buttload of time, was an FBI informant, coincidentally. So there we go. Back to the early conversation.
If we take January 6th, whatever happened on January 6th, people might disagree on that. We take that out of the mix. Is there a single incident that's been recorded of the Proud Boys engaging in racist, in violent racist behavior at all?
No.
Like a single one. I mean, ask yourself this: if you think the Proud Boys are such a menace, is there literally just one incident that they're associated with which was engaging in racial violence? And I'd love to know about it. And because when I went down to the Bannon trial a year ago last summer, so I actually met an attorney who was representing Joey Biggs in the J6 thing. I don't know if he was still with him when it came to trial, but he's a very, very high priced attorney, and he was telling me and it turned out he actually knew Ron Coleman. And I asked Ron at that point, I was like, is the Proud Boys, I was like, I really don't know. Are they a racist group or is it just hype? And he was like, it's all hype. It's complete hype. They're not anything.
Yeah. The only black thing the Proud Boys beat up were people in Antifa.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they did.
But those are usually white people.
Well, that's what I mean.
True.
But they were wearing black. So black hoodies are the only thing they beat up.
By the way, that's a very true statement, though, Steve. How many black Antifa members have you ever seen?
Yeah, a handful.
Yeah, I mean it does crack me up, and yes, Proud Boys.
Oh yeah, when you see them, you're
members.
like, wait, wow, that's interesting. Like it catches your eye when you see it.
Yeah, no, 100% white. I mean, and anyway, there's a lot of, shall we say, white benefactors who are speaking for other people, which is very confusing. Like, or you know what? We can go on to another organization. We got Joe here, so I love to pick on him. Let's talk about your favorite organization that's taking care of your peeps, the ADL.
What do you want me to talk about? What do you want me to tell you?
How much are they paying you, Joe?
I was on a Twitter space talking about the ADL a week or so ago, and I referred to Jonathan Greenblatt as Jonathan Goebbels because nobody has been a worse propagandist against Jews in the last 80 years than Jonathan Greenblatt. He hurts Jews more than any racist out there. Literally, this guy is he's so awful. He's such a terrible, I think he's a terrible, everything that he's done has created so much anti-Semitism that otherwise would not exist by his constant wolf cries. Like he's like, and he doesn't act and basically living up to or doing everything he can to make the public face of Jews live down to the stereotypes that the worst racists say about Jews. Meaning the worst racists were basically saying that there's a Jewish cabal which is like controlling the entire world. And he does everything he can to make it look as if that's exactly what Jews are doing, even though I have no idea where I'm like, where's my vote on anything that I don't have any say. But basically I'm like, it's like as soon as Kanye is complaining that he's getting silent, that he can't speak, he does everything he can to scream that he needs to be silenced. It's like you're such an idiot, and he cries wolf over things that are nothing, like literally nothing, and tries to drum up stuff. And what bothers me most about this is it's not like there isn't some anti-Semitism out there. That is, unfortunately, there is, much less anti-Semitism. Fortunately, there's much less anti-Semitism today than there was when I was growing up 40 years ago. Much less than there was 40 years ago. Thank God. There's much less racism in general than there was 40 years ago. But there still is some. Yeah,
Christ, Wolfenstein.
That's great.
Well played.
But yeah, Joe, you're right, and it's funny because
I wouldn't listen to him anymore, though. That's my point. When you're crying wolf all the time, I wouldn't listen to him because
it's not even that. But I know PSA Sitch, he put up this thing, and I thought I didn't realize this happened. The ADL wrote to the government of Iceland when Iceland was they were outlawing they passed a bill that, as far as it ended up basically would cause an issue for the Orthodox Jewish community about getting circumcisions done. And they wrote a letter saying, you realize if you guys do this, it's going to make y'all look like a bunch of Nazis. And I'm not saying you would be Nazis, but if you did it, we'd have to say, wow, you guys kind of look like Nazis. And they scared the Icelandic government into stop doing it.
So on that particular issue, I'll say this. On that
I just thought it was interesting.
Issue,
they wrote a letter and it stopped the government.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this, and every time I get into a topic of circumcision, I end up getting hate mail on this. I will tell you that traditionally, going back literally more than 2,000 years, one of the things that non-Jewish governments, when they've controlled Jews and trying to exhibit that control and try and actually take them from the faith, going back literally to the days when Greeks were in power, like pre-Roman days, is one of the first things they would do is they would ban circumcision. And so that's a historic, and that is historically an anti-Semitic route that other government officials have taken in a way to discriminate against Jews, because we practice circumcision is considered an essential part of practicing the Jewish faith. So in that sense, that's actually an area which I find one far less objectionable than his constantly screaming about how anyone who says something about Soros is anti-Semitic, or which is so awful. It's so awful. When people say something like that, because it's like, what, because he's Jewish that means he's not evil? That's absurd. There are plenty of evil people who are men, women, any possible ethnicity, race, religion, whatever. And so you're now basically saying that any Jew who does anything is it can't be labeled evil, otherwise you're going to try and cancel them. Are you out of your freaking mind?
No, let's not go too crazy, Joe. I'm sure that he would call you evil.
Yeah, I guess so. True.
George Soros would definitely not be evil, and it's anti-Semitic to say so. But you, Joe, you're kind of like if Nate suddenly went conservative, he would not be considered black.
Right.
You, my friend, are not technically
very
Jew.
White. Yeah, I guess not. Yeah, I guess
they're going to take they'll take your Jew card away, Joe.
Maybe that's why I'm not part of the whole cabal. I don't know.
Maybe. Oh, I got some locals tips. Hold on here. Entry required sent a tip on locals. Eric and Steve, but others are here too to jump in. Elaborate on how much better the USA would be if the DOJ/FBI/DNC focused on actual terrorism and domestic crime, and not just doing these show prosecutions and cover-ups for the DNC and, to be fair to the Bush dynasty. I think that's almost a rhetorical question, but
well, I would just caution that, because when they weren't doing all of this, and yes, now they're going after who white supremacist groups to set up, the FBI was setting up random Arab and Muslim guys who were of not exactly the sharpest IQ and trying to get them to join fictional terror cells. So the FBI stopping their own terror plots is nothing new. So I'm just saying that, I'm going to go back to the FBI in the early 2000s.
Well,
they weren't
you,
any better. You
yeah,
didn't
you
know
can
about them.
you can go back before that to the civil rights leaders. They
Yeah,
were
that's
doing
what I
that.
was going to say. Like,
Yeah.
Martin Luther
Well,
King and the rest of them, they were after them.
Yeah.
It's funny
Hold on,
because
and if you want to bridge the gap too, don't forget the Waco and Ruby Ridge, which led
Yeah.
into McVeigh. So we've got we're moving into that territory again. So that they were going against the left and the civil rights leaders, which I know Nate's going to jump in. I apologize, but then they kind of said, "Oh, let's go after the quote right wing," and then we got into Ruby Ridge and all that. That started to go really awry, and so then they pivoted back to let's go after some foreigners. They're okay to go after. That's a free for all, and now we're back to the right wing. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Nate.
you said you literally said exactly what I was going to say. You took the mic from me and then said what I speech. But no, I ditto what Eric said. But again, the FBI has always been a tool for the government. They were called G-men at one time, right? They were like the G-men, the government men. And unfortunately, because of politics, who's ever in power at that time controls that arm of the government. And maybe we're talking about maybe fundamentally changing the way the DOJ is kind of operated here. But then you also have to talk about the deep state too. And when I mean deep state, because everybody keeps talking about deep state, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the career politicians, not the career people who are working. Yes, within the government who last generations and don't stay with one administration. For instance, when Obama was in there was that same deep state. When Trump is in there, and now they're the same people. Those are the people who are career prosecutors, who are the career people who have these, who have their own political agendas and political motives. So I think if we're talking about overhauling the DOJ, I don't think it's destroy the DOJ, but I do think we need to make it in a way more independent from the political aspirations of who's ever in charge.
What steps would you recommend to make the DOJ more independent?
Well, I don't know, because I think you have the president, obviously the chief executive officer, runs the DOJ, and then he appoints the head. But then I wouldn't know. I wouldn't want to make them a fourth branch of government, because that gives them kind of a little bit too much power. But then maybe you'd have more oversight between them and Congress, or make him, there has to be some way where we can make it so one political party, when they're in power, because that's essentially what Trump is saying now. When he gets in power, he's going to do the same thing the Democrats are doing. I think, don't get me wrong, I think Trump has a right to feel that way, but I think that's also dangerous talk, because guess what? When the next guy gets in there, he's going to be back on the other side saying the other thing. So I don't have the solution, but I think not having a solution doesn't mean we can't at least talk about the problem. If you know what I mean.
I think we can go back to the 70s a little bit. Believe it or not, not everything during Carter was terrible, but the Church Committee was a very powerful tool that I think did knock some manners into the CIA, FBI a little bit for a little while. And
that
Congress
was a guy named Church, right?
Yeah. It was a congressman.
Frank Senator Church.
Yeah, Senator Frank Church, I think it was. Yeah. Anyway, out of Minnesota, I want to say. Anyway, Congress has abdicated their responsibility. And people are like, what are you talking about? But they, in fact, have. If you look at it, all these organizations that you see under the administration, the EPA, everything, is Congress not doing their damn job. They just hand it over to a committee. And, well, hold on, let me finish.
Yeah.
I'm not against completely what Vivek is saying. I don't trust Vivek. But we do not need 20 freaking law enforcement organizations. So the first thing I do is shake that all up and say, essentially, you have your domestic law enforcement and your foreign thing. The CIA is foreign. They're not law enforcement. They're espionage, so they are different. And roll these things up. Border Patrol, Coast Guard, they're both kind of borders, both protecting. They can be together. You can have, I don't know how many multiple organizations into one domestic law enforcement wing that does have to report in front of Congress every once in a while. So that's kind of the start I'd have on that. But Joe, go ahead.
No, I want to spitball an idea at all four of you and ask you, because I was inspired by what you were just talking about by the Church Committee. Perhaps it would make sense if we're going to, assuming that Vivek doesn't become president, or whoever is our next president doesn't shut down the FBI altogether. Perhaps a healthy direction might be something along the lines of a Church Committee, where there's actually an established law that there is some sort of Senate or House committee that is overseen by whichever wing of the government is not in control of the White House, and that they would have the ability to basically look over what the DOJ and FBI are engaging in for purposes of critiquing and sort of keeping them in check. So if there's a Democrat in the White House, in that case, the Republicans would have a committee that they largely control. And if the Republicans are in charge, then the Democrats would be largely in control of that same committee, and that their job would be oversight of the FBI and the DOJ. And in that sense, we can help protect those, to some degree at least, help protect those agencies from acting politically. I know, and I'm saying this knowing full well that while Trump wasn't the president, his own FBI was against him. So in that sense, it wouldn't have helped in that particular scenario.
That's the deep state scenario problem that we have.
Yeah, and I'm fully cognizant of that issue. But I'm looking for a starting point to how to remedy this situation where we just seem to have such a powerful agency that is completely unchecked and has the theoretical capability to just literally just try and target the opposing party.
I've got an interesting idea on that, but this one you'd have to really be careful with. Some sort of an AI that would scrape cases, like some sort of a neutral, and it's very difficult because AI involves programming, and then obviously programmers have opinions. So I'm not saying it's perfect. It would have to be refined. We're spitballing, but something that could crawl through all reports that are turned in, all cases that are turned in, and run it against the Constitution, like whether this would be a constitutional thing or not a constitutional thing, using, tracking all emails and all correspondence. Internally to the government, I'm not talking about the people, but internal to the government, something like that, to where it's fully automated and it's a black box, like you're not allowed to manipulate it or whatever. And it just kind of spits it out. And if it finds something to be off in any way, then you would have a branch that would have to investigate it and, put that part on trial.
Interesting. But that would be algorithmically controlled. I mean,
right.
But I'm always concerned about adding bureaucracy onto the bureaucracy to fix the bureaucracy.
But that's not a bureaucracy. That's a program.
Yeah, but essentially somebody's gonna have to run that, and then you're gonna have analysts, and then so essentially you're gonna have to build that out. That was it. Like it's the same thing like the Homeland Security. Homeland Security was supposed to be like essentially we're just gonna aggregate all this, and now it's become a bureaucracy of its own. I'm just trying to figure out a way in which to not add on to the bureaucracy, because I think the issue is it's just too big.
Well, I agree with that.
You're adding it on and making it even bigger.
No, I totally agree with all that. That's why I said dump all the other departments, where you have, here's your domestic law enforcement, here's your foreign espionage, whatever the hell you want to call it. So Homeland Security would be gone. Border Patrol would be gone. All of these would be gone. It'd be rolled into one. FBI would be gone. So whatever it is, it'd be the US MI5 and US MI6 or some crap like that. Whatever. So I totally agree on that. And like I said, it's not a perfect thing with the algorithm. I'm just trying to think of how to get some degree of oversight or some degree of auditing or checks within that could bring up things before they go awry.
Well, one question I always like to ask: how many agencies do you think the federal government has?
Oh God, hundreds.
Yeah, holy cow!
Maybe even thousands.
It's at about 500. We're talking about around 500 different agencies in the federal government. So, and we're talking about all those agencies with law enforcement power too, right? Because the parks people got law enforcement power over the parks, and this one got. Matter of fact, there's like something like 7 that deals with federal parks and federal land. Right, 7 different agencies, and they all have cross-border jurisdiction. So I think the federal government has unfortunately become a monster in all aspects. Right, that's why we're paying all this money.
It's a hydra. You cut off one head and you get another. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And I think the politicians' only correction for that is to add more to it. Right, to add more to it. That's what we're talking about. Homeland Security was one of the biggest ones added to it. So I think maybe we're talking about restructuring the government fundamentally. From maybe instead of having just the 3 on top in all these federal agencies, to maybe structuring it where you have like maybe a kind of a quasi fourth branch where you would have something like these agencies, because that's essentially, as an example, the independent counsel. That was essentially known as it was known as the fourth branch of government, because it really didn't go under congressional oversight. The president didn't have any control of it, and it just reported to the court. So it's kind of
is it constitutional though?
Well, it all depends. The Supreme Court in what was the famous case that Scalia dissented in? It was actually Scalia's greatest dissent. What was the name of the case? Damn, I now forget the name of the case. But the Supreme Court said yes, the independent counsel, even though it was this independent, was legal. So I'm not, it's essentially that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fundamentally changing the government as we have it now. I don't know if that's going to add a lot more problems than make the solutions, because I don't want to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater, but that's essentially what we're talking about.
Okay, so let's say we're in agreement on a couple things. By the way, on locals, Steve, no entry required, wanted to know if that was a green screen library picked behind you, or is that really your bookshelves?
That's the bookshelves.
I thought so. And
pick a book out of it. Pick a book. There it is. He took a book out to go off the green screen.
And Sean, they also agreed with you about setting up people who aren't necessarily bright for unconstitutional fees or whatever that you were talking about earlier. But okay, so one thing we're all in agreement with is I'm guessing simplifying the structure that's in the government right now. Not necessarily dumping like all the employees. We know that's another question, but consolidating these departments into fewer, going from 500 to say 50. Are we in agreement with that?
Yes, because essentially we're just really talking about one branch of the government too. We're just talking about the executive branch, because all these administrators are under the executive branch. So that's what we're talking about. Making that into one, shrinking that from 500 to whatever.
Okay. And continuing with that, then we get into the other odds. Now, I would argue, and as much as I hate them, pull the responsibility back that I feel, again, a lot of the administration has taken from Congress. So functions that are they're being carried out by the administration, I guess under the theme, the administration does it, Congress oversees it. Congress has to get off their dead ass and actually oversee the simplified government. Does anybody disagree?
Well, you know what you're talking about, the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, for all you wannabe law students out there. And what the Administrative Procedures Act is saying is that, hey, we as Congress are not experts in healthcare. We're not experts in building roads. We're not experts in all these things, right? Mm-hmm. And so we can pass a law to fund it, but we can't tell you how to do it. So they passed the Administrative Procedures Act, which creates the National Highway Safety Board, which creates all the law enforcement agencies, and say, all right, the executive, you do that, and we're going to defer to you to do these things, right? Because we assume you're going to hire the experts. But this is where now the thing goes awry, right?
All the way to war. By the way, all the way to declaring war.
Well, not declaring war, but
no, but they've given that up too.
Close, because you have the military, you have the Authorization Act from back in the 90s. So they did take some of that back after George Bush was kind of going crazy. They were like, we're gonna do the military. What is it? Military use authorization, whatever that act. But you're right though. I don't want to belie that point. You are correct. So what I'm saying is that saying Congress needs to take more of that power back, but to put you back in the same position they were before you had this administrative agency craziness that happened. Do they rely on the people who know what they're doing? Or you understand what I'm saying? Because Congress, you got 500 people in Congress, right? Can they really figure out how to build the interstate highway system, how to launch rockets? You kind of have to rely on the APA to do that. And again, all these 500 agencies are there under the Administrative Procedures Act. So,
but what I'm saying is that, okay, fine. You still have to oversee it. You have to get off your dead ass and oversee it.
Well, they've been good at expanding it, haven't they? They don't mind doing that and making it, because to me, whether it's simple or complicated in terms of how many agencies and how they report, you still have the issues of the authority is too broad. It got increased, especially after 9/11. At least back before that, they had to pretend that they were doing things under their authority. After that, they can just do whatever they want. It's too broad, it's too big, and there are too many secrets.
They're creating law.
There's not much accountability to the public from the agencies when they're able to hide so much of what they do. That to me is a big part of it. You don't know what all they do, and I agree with both you guys when you're talking about Congress needs to handle this, but they don't. And Nate's right. They still have to rely on people, but they set the tempo, and the tempo is let's make it bigger and let's give them more power.
Right, and this is my biggest issue too, or not biggest, but it's another one that you've got to consider. These administration branches are actually creating laws through regulation, and they're not supposed to write laws. No, hold on. So you've got something where the Congress has abdicated their responsibility. Then you have these organizations who are creating regulations, which essentially are bullshit laws, in my opinion.
Well, so the way it works under the APA is that these rules and regulations are based on, like what they would say is like the famous case of the lion, right? The guy, he had a lion, and the regulation was like you have to have 6 feet walls and 6 feet fences, and he had a 4-foot fence, and then so they sued him and got money for that. But the reason why Congress kind of left that open, Congress says you get to regulate wild animals. But going into the weeds on how you actually do it, do we have to pass a law saying you have this, or do we allow them to pass rules to say this is the way you do it? And also don't forget the environment also changes with certain things. Like what's good now may not be good next year because of
here's the problem.
So that's kind of why Congress allows that rulemaking ability.
So what they say is, okay, we're going to create an organization saying you take care of this thing, now go take care of it. And that they get to do it any way they can, any way they want. And they're not even in front of Congress checking on, hey, how are you doing that, by the way? What are you? No, you have these behemoth organizations that grow bigger, and they become like their own freaking governments in of themselves. And the weight of that bureaucracy is unbearable.
Eric, you are 100% right. It's literally, just so everyone understands, most of the laws that everybody in this room and who's watching this video follows are not actually laws passed by Congress, but they are administrative regulations, right? From driving to what's it called, to immigration. Most of those things are, and matter of fact, most of the judges that people see, especially even in immigration cases, are administrative judges. They're judges actually under the administrative agencies. They are not federal judges in that sense. So I do understand it has become a behemoth, but it's still, and the argument has always been made that the administrative state, that's they essentially call it, is unconstitutional. But and to be fair, I agree with everything you just said, Eric. But the pushback is always going to be from, especially those administrative agencies, is that traffic tickets are different than murders. So Congress, yes, are passing laws about murders, but then what about these little traffic tickets, right? What about these little bitty things? Is it a different way of administrating those than the big things? And that's what kind of Congress, like, we have to kind of focus on the big things.
Stop paying your traffic tickets, and what happens to you?
It's you owe the traffic ticket, right?
Eventually, you get locked up.
Yes.
So
there's a process to it.
But doesn't matter though. All these little things, not quite the same, except they ultimately lead to that same thing. Go ahead, don't pay your taxes.
Yeah. But again, taxes I think are law versus administrative agency. But like you're right though. If you stop there is that presumption of law. And just so everybody knows how the APA works, the Administrative Procedures Act. Congress passes a law. It's I forgot what it's called. It's called an Enabling Act. It allows the administrative agencies to do whatever they do. Then the administrative agencies get to interpret the that law that Congress passed. And there's a case named Chevron. Now it's called the Chevron. It's called Chevron Justice Thomas hates it. A lot of the justices of the Supreme Court hates it, but it's still good law. Now, what Chevron says is, if the administrative agency, if they interpret the law that Congress passed that gives them power, whatever they interpreted for that, whatever they interpreted it as, that's the law. So the Supreme Court has said we're deferring to those agencies' interpretation of their own enabling statutes. Now, Justice Thomas hates it. He says that's unconstitutional. Only judges should be able to do that. But the Supreme Court before him said no. The agencies can do that. So now we're living in this situation, like Eric is saying, in which administrative agencies have this tremendous amount of power, where Congress just has. So Congress's ability to regulate or to control the administrative agencies really is only at the level of the enabling statute, or the statute that actually gives them power. So Congress can go in and change it and say, hey, we're not giving you the authority to do X, Y, and Z. But Congress essentially always writes those statutes very broadly. Because why? Because it wants them to do more things. It wants them to have more power. So I think the problem here that we're talking about is not with the agencies or the agency structures as we're talking about, but it's Congress who's given them this authority, this broad authority, and the Supreme Court who said it's okay. That's what we're talking about. So now we're talking about Congress taking back that power from the APA, from Chevron, and making it a lot more streamlined to say you can't do all this stuff. This is specifically what you can do under this enabling statute. I know that was a long colloquy, but that's essentially how it goes.
Yeah, well, I would love to see him do it. Let me get this in here. Justin Wright, your take on Scalise allowing the feds to tell social media to suppress speech.
Oh, okay, I know what this is about.
Oh, good. Somebody fill me in.
Wait, Scalise? Wait, Scalise?
That doesn't sound right.
Maybe I meant Alito. A lot of people confuse Alito and Scalise.
Yeah, it's got to be Scalise is gone, right?
Yeah. So probably means Alito. Hey, Uncivil, I see he's in the chat. So I actually meant to go over this quickly on my stream yesterday, but I didn't have a chance. I believe it's a reference to the procedural issues that are developing in Missouri v. Biden. So you're familiar with that case, Eric? Missouri v. Biden?
I've heard it. It's a recent one. They've had a major win in it, from what I understand.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It's a really interesting thing. Okay, so Missouri v. Biden, every American, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, every American needs to know about this case in Missouri v. Biden, where basically states of Missouri and Louisiana are suing the government to stop them from meddling with big tech and directing who big tech should suppress, censor, tweets that should come down, posts that should come down, or should be flagged or in any way suppressed, as it being a direct violation of our First Amendment rights. The government is not allowed to control our speech. And they're basically coming to these major platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Google, whatever, and directing them as to specific posts that they say this needs to come down. And big tech, as we've seen in the Twitter files, the big tech was actually establishing hotlines to the FBI and CDC and all these different agencies to contact them and let them know which schmuck somewhere in the middle America or in Texas or anywhere in Alaska sent out a tweet that they don't like, that they should take it down. I mean, and so that's what this case has been about. It evolved from the Twitter files.
That's right. They're acting as a government actor because they fulfilled the request that was coming from the government, I believe is the premise, right?
Well, I mean, whether they're basically, and the suit alleges that the government first was basically threatening that we're going to yank Section 230 protection away from you unless you do what we want, and then came in there and started suppressing literally tens of millions of social media comments and posts and things of that nature. So the lawsuit is commenced. Let me explain procedurally, because it's a little bit complex procedurally. So when a lawsuit is commenced, and they're seeking to get a declaratory order from the judge that tells the government they're not allowed to do this any longer. So that's the objective of this. Well, that is a lawsuit, which normally a lawsuit takes many years. So what the states of Missouri and Louisiana did was they moved for a injunctive relief or temporary restraining orders, how you'll commonly hear the term phrased. And that is basically saying that what are going to be the rules that the parties are going to operate under while the litigation is going on, because the litigation can take many years. So is government allowed to continue to intercede during this period or not? I've applied for many TROs in my lifetime, and there's certain important elements that if you're entitled to injunctive relief, in order to show the court that you're entitled to injunctive relief of any kind, you need to establish primarily three things. One is that you have a likelihood of success in the merits, meaning it's more likely than not that you're going to win. Two is you have to show balancing of equities, that justice sort of demands that we do this. And three, you have to show irreparable harm. Irreparable harm means my damage here cannot properly be compensated by money. Even if you had all the money in the world, you'll never be able to figure out exactly how much I'm damaged. And so the states of Missouri and Louisiana said, we believe we're entitled to injunctive relief, that we have the merit, the balance of equities favors us. We know is what's fairer, to give this relief or not. That's what balancing of equities is. What seems more justice-like, and also that the harm is irreparable. So we'll come back to the first element in a moment. But basically, when you're talking about irreparable harm, so they're saying, how are you going to measure how much suppression of a speech affects someone? If I stop you from being able to send out a tweet, is it the same if they stop me versus if they stop someone who has 12 followers versus someone they stop who has 40 million followers? I mean, what type of financial impact is that? There's no way that's calculable. So that's what makes something irreparable harm, when you cannot properly calculate the damage. So that issue they checked off right away. Balancing equities usually favors the status quo, which means in this case, whatever is currently the situation, let's keep that in place. That's what injunction normally favors. The judge ignored that and said, we're not going to go with the status quo, that it's more equitable to stop the government from doing this, because he found, when it came to the likelihood of success issue, that he found what the government into the level of interceding by the government was so egregious, he referred to it as the worst abuse of First Amendment rights in American history. He was astonished, wrote a 105-page supporting memorandum of law, basically going through all these different agencies and individuals like Fauci, Joe Biden himself, Karine Jean-Pierre Perrine, or whatever her name is, Pierre, any person that you can think of in government who's, would have any oversight on this, CDC, CISA, all these different agencies, Department of Homeland Security, one after another, saying all of them cannot intercede except unless it's for an emergency type of thing, which is like if there's a hurricane coming, so public needs to know about it. You can understand why it makes sense to allow the government to notify and tell big tech, hey, there's a typhoon that's coming, or tsunami's about to hit the southern coast of California, and to alert people for the public's well-being. So that's what the TRO was. It was signed by Judge Terry Dowdy from Louisiana. One of the most amazing decisions you'll ever see written, because of how thorough he was and why he was giving this strong relief, and probably almost certainly because he knew this was going to be appealed. Well, they went to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit, when they came back on it, everyone is reporting this as a win for Judge Dowdy and a loss for the government. But the reality is that's not exactly true. That was my initial takeaway before I actually read the decision and spoke with other people who had read the decision. And what the Fifth Circuit did was they said they kept some of Judge Dowdy's TRO in place, and they carved out a lot of exceptions for various organizations that they say we cannot see in the record here enough overt activity by CISA. And CISA is Cyber Internet Infrastructure Security Administration, I believe. They're the ones who really are the ones who are dealing directly with big tech. That's their job, as opposed to the FBI, which was another party here. The FBI's job is not to deal with big tech. It's CISA that's supposed to be doing this. And CISA was one party, for example, that was cut out, that originally had been enjoined and stopped from meddling, that under the Fifth Circuit decision is no longer enjoined. They're free to do whatever they want with respect to meddling. And that should be very concerning to everyone. After that Fifth Circuit decision, what happened was with Alito, what this person was asking about, and that's why this is so confusing. So the government came forward to the Supreme Court and said, we are in a status of limbo, because when we got decision from Judge Dowdy, we stopped that from going to effect right away. We got to stay on Judge Dowdy's injunction, so we were not bound by that injunction of Judge Dowdy until the Fifth Circuit would weigh in on it. Well, the Fifth Circuit has weighed in on it, and they modified his order, allowing a lot of people who would be enjoined to no longer be enjoined. But under the procedural rules of the court, when we got this stay from the Fifth Circuit that stopped Judge Dowdy's order from coming into effect, that is procedurally, that is something that only lasts until the Fifth Circuit comes to a decision, or a couple days thereafter. Or then it automatically is undone. It automatically goes away, and you have to wait for this new order to take over. But the new order was not set to come in by the Fifth Circuit, was not set to come in, I think, until the end of October. So like, we're in limbo now, because technically Judge Dowdy's order is the only thing left to govern what role, responsibilities, and duties the government has now during this stage. So that's why we need direction from the court, and we're afraid that technically we're bound by Judge Dowdy's decision unless the Supreme Court intercedes, when the Fifth Circuit said we should not be bound by that. So please put a stay on Judge Dowdy's order from taking effect so that we can continue doing what we're doing beforehand, because that is what the Fifth Circuit's decision says. So Judge Alito went along with that because procedurally that makes sense. As far as where we are in determination status right now, that's exactly where we are at right now, where his order should technically still be on hold, because the Fifth Circuit's decision is what really is binding on the government, but procedurally it would not be binding on them unless Judge Alito stepped in. So when Alito steps in and issues that, grants that, he's not stepping on free speech. He's simply filling in a gap in the way things were structured time-wise as to what orders would be governing the government over the next 45 days or so. So that is your primer if you face on a test as to exactly what happened with Judge Alito purportedly stepping on free speech. He was really just doing what procedurally any judge would have done in that circumstance.
Anybody want to jump in?
Was that rather exhaustive? It was.
It kind of was, dude.
It's very detailed, though, and I understood it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Definitely. What was the original subject? Okay. That was from that super chat. I don't even know what we were talking about.
I'm sorry.
No.
I gave a whole lecture there that you can sort of carve out.
Oh, it will be carved out as a clip. I promise. But
you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump actually to this story, which I sent out to a few people ahead of time. I don't know if anybody's been covering it before. I had heard about it, but this is a chilling story, in my opinion. It's a ruling for self-deletion upheld for a Philadelphia teacher found with 20 stab wounds. Now think about it for a second. How do you go about self-deleting, stabbing yourself 20 times? And
well, in principle, it might depend a little bit what you mean by stab wounds, because depending on what you mean, they could be hesitation marks.
There's a graphic for you.
Yeah, 10 of them in the back of her, and a giant gash in her head too as part of this process.
So,
right. But I was trying to answer your earlier question. Okay. How do you have 20 stab wounds and it not be suicide? Because sometimes when people are using knives, their initial strikes are shallow because they haven't fully committed yet. And so later, depending on what you mean by stab wound, it's like how you could have 20 and it be like not what it might otherwise appear to be. So if you would like to change, if you'd like to ask me a different question, then I'll answer that. But
well, I would argue a hesitation mark isn't a stab wound. But
that's why I said it depends what you define as a stab wound. That was the whole predicate.
It definitely could be. And plus, you can stab yourself 20 times in non.
Is it loud?
In places that aren't fatal. But I think that picture that you just showed, that was definitely somebody who was playing.
I'll just put on the automatic adjustment, see if that fixes things.
Yeah, I'm not going to leave it lingering up because we're on YouTube. Yeah. But yes, no, this case is really controversial because her estranged husband or fiance, I don't remember, Steve, you looked into it, apparently is wired into the community and might have been a cop.
Yeah, so what happened was he says he went down to the gym, and when he came back, he couldn't get in touch with her. The door was latched from inside. He breaks it open and finds her in this state. And original thought for the medical examiner apparently was, well, this is homicide or undetermined. And after they consulted with the police, they indicated it was, as you said, I guess, self-deletion. But there were a lot of things in the case that are very weird beyond that graphic of where some of these wounds are. 10 of them are to the back, and they're pretty substantial. I mean, Kurt's point is a really good one, that you could be testing this out or hesitating. Sure. But a lot of them appear to be very substantial wounds. And they have testimony from other doctors and stuff that this is wrong. One of the things that happened was the crime scene, if it was a crime, was cleaned up before the police got a warrant to go in and look at it. But the landlord took a video of it before it was cleaned up, and that video is gone. So the Court of Appeals was deciding in this case whether the parents had standing to seek to force the medical examiner to change the ruling, and they decided 2-1 no, that you don't have standing to do that. But even the court in that decision apparently said this is all a crock. Like, this is terrible. This result is absolutely terrible. And I suppose what I'm reading from this is the county's DA is looking at this to see whether this is something they should intervene on or not. But the Attorney General's office apparently backed up the original investigation that this was not the result of homicide by another person, right? So, but it looks to me, obviously, that graphic, and I don't know how accurate it is. If you look at the graphic, you're like, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. This woman didn't stab herself in the back 10 times and in the front 10 times. I mean, and gash her in the head and have bruises everywhere.
Comments that are coming in, but people have studied a long time. Here's a couple extras. 2 of the stab wounds were inflicted after her heart stopped beating. And another one of the first stab wounds severed her spinal cord.
Yeah.
Again, it depends what you mean by sever her spinal cord, because different spinal injuries have different kind of impacts. Well, so where did it sever the spinal cord?
Yeah, but how, that's like in Chicago. He ran into my knife 10 times. Like that. How does someone stab themselves in the back 10 times? That seems really difficult. It's like you got to reach around and that seems really tough. That seems really, really tough. I can understand, and I agree with what Steve just said, that Kurt, that your comments about someone perhaps building up the courage to actually finish the act is logical. But in the back just seems like, why would they do it in the back? Like they're afraid of looking at the knife and then doing the back 10 times. Like, how can, at a certain point, you can't reach back there anymore? You would think, but I don't know.
And again, they call them hesitation marks. not generally hesitation holes. But anyway, whatever. I do find it very peculiar. Also interesting, though. Okay, let's say the ruling is weird. They don't have the standing. Where does standing come in? If it's actually a homicide, does it no longer become a homicide because they ruled it another way?
Well, the standing is who has the right to come into court against who. See all the election lawsuits, right? Mm-hmm. And so 2-1 panel says the parents didn't have the right to do this. I haven't read the decision, but I know I did see from the summary that that the decision was not on the merits of whether this was a good call by the medical examiner or malfeasance. It was based on standing.
Usually when it comes to standing issues like this, it's the government has finite resources, so you can't force the government to do X, Y, and Z. I forget the name of the case. Kurt knows the case from Colorado with the Scalia. What was the case with the woman who had the restraining order, and they said that, you can't force the government to do anything. And I think this
that's Rock Gonzalez.
Yeah. So the government, you can't force the government to do anything. You can't force the government to, because they have finite resources and blah blah blah. So the only recourse would be at the ballot box and not in the courts.
So that's okay. As a non-lawyer, I find this deeply disturbing. It's essentially saying because the murder is inconvenient, and they already did that tough shit. So this is a thing that literally has no statute of limitations, I believe, anywhere, right? Is there anywhere in America that you have a statute of limitations for homicide and murder?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
but this is even better. You just say, well, screw it. It's not a murder.
Well,
just won't call it that.
In your example, the standing issue would be a private person trying to bring criminal murder charges against someone who committed murder.
Well, they were trying to get it declared a murder.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Bring charges. They were trying to say, no, your ruling is screwed.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's the government is the only person who has standing in criminal court to bring charges or to even make those determinations. Private parties generally do not.
So
private parties can go into civil court and have that, but private parties can't go into criminal court and have that. That's the purview of the government itself.
This is a huge problem though, because now if you have the government saying, whatever, I don't care, for whatever reason, there's no recourse to force the government to actually do the damn job.
It's called prosecutorial discretion generally. So if no matter if the prosecutor says we don't believe it and the ME says I don't believe it, then you can't sue them to try to get that overturned, because that's the discretion of the prosecutor and of the ME in that role. Though your only recourse would be to at least get them out of office. So your recourse is at the ballot box, not for their determination.
So you're saying if you could vote in another prosecutor and then hopefully they will get off their dead ass and do something?
They could, yes. But that's what in this case, it seems like the ME and the prosecutor would have that same discretion. If they chose not to, no matter what the facts are, if they chose not to prosecute that particular crime, then they have that prosecutorial discretion. And you can't sue them to make them do it.
Does anybody else find that disturbing, or am I just completely a Pollyanna idiot?
I'm very bothered by it, because I mean, what kind of relief is that? I mean, what kind of victory is that to basically say that we'll vote this guy out, and what the heck does that?
But am I wrong though?
You're correct on the law.
Oh yeah.
You're correct on the law. I'm simply, although I mean, whenever you're talking about issues of standing, I have problems with standing being a problem, because I feel as if standing is very easily abused by a judge who basically, not in this case, but I'm saying I think that standing can very easily be used to just not have to deal with a problem and kick it down the road and hope that the right party never comes along. Or you can claim in certain circumstances that you can find a reason to say that nobody has standing in a lot of situations. So I mean, when we're talking about do these parents have standing here to basically seek justice on behalf of their kid? I mean,
I'm not sure the parents do, but I wonder if the estate of the kid does. So I wonder if maybe that was a different way to go about it.
Yeah, that's an interesting call. And that's great. That's actually potentially what should be a better answer, because sometimes the parents might not be standing up for the estate. Whoever is the probate, whoever is the executor of the estate should have the ability to basically say, I'm standing up for the dead. Because
the finding of the medical examiner is arguably harmful to the estate, because in any sort of potential wrongful death suit that the estate would want to bring, right, the finding of the medical examiner would be harmful, and if it's an error, so that would give you standing potentially, because the court would be in a position to redress the harm.
They need to hire you, Kurt. That was a great call.
Everybody clip this and send it to the family.
So they really should.
Sometimes I have ideas.
Now, if you do get past standing, do you run into what Nate's talking about, which is what's the scope of mandamus you can ask for? If the medical examiner said, well, we're backlogged, we'll never issue a report, maybe 10 years from now, or we're just not going to give an opinion. That's one thing, but given an opinion that you disagree with, what could the court order? Look at it again, and then the guy says the same thing. Yeah, I looked at it again and still think it's self-delusion.
I think it puts it into their hands. Like right now, it's kind of nebulous, right? Where they can skate by not prosecuting. Well, I'm not going to prosecute. The medical examiner did. If you could limit the amount of people where you could point to one person saying, you, sir, ma'am, you specifically are blockading this, that would help in the ballot box angle that Nate is discussing. Wouldn't you agree? If you can pin them down, like, no, it is you are the one who's stopping this from going forward. You are the one who said, I will not charge it.
See, I think in this case, the ME's actually moved to another state. So, if they want to change it,
well, that doesn't matter, that the ME themselves, because the ME is the office, not the person. So I mean,
so if you got a new person,
you're bringing the action against the office.
So how come this new person doesn't want to change it? I mean, it seems like it's more than one person not interested in changing it.
I will point out that that one flaw that I'm considering in Kurt's suggestion is, in many circumstances, you might have, and it could be even here, the prime suspect is the executor of the estate.
Mm-hmm.
So if the prime suspect is if it was the husband, like let's say a husband is the executor, would commonly be the executor of the wife's estate. So, and if he would be deemed the prime suspect in the situation of there being a murder charge, well, in that case, why would he want to change the ME's findings?
So now you need to go one step further. Now you need to go to surrogacy court and challenge the executor of the estate and have a new executor appointed. Find it exciting.
Yeah, this sounds like a lawyer's dream, because and when I say that, that's lawyer's code for like
money,
really, really expensive litigation.
Well, yeah, I did see there's a separate lawsuit about alleged cover up and stuff. So, and I don't know who the plaintiff is, whether it is in fact the estate or not. But there's some other litigation going on aside from this request to force the ME to look at it again.
What if they find that? I'm curious. You guys are talking about choosing. What if we do find there was in fact a cover up, and what if it does involve governmental figures, I'm not going to lay any particular thing down. Would that automatically generate some kind of charges, or could it be taken out of local hands to, say, attorney general hands? Would that be another approach? Like the attorney general could step in and say, we're taking over the case on the state level?
As a matter of state law? It would depend on the state. I mean, that's going to be very specific what the attorney general's office can and cannot do in such circumstances.
Yeah, because I know in New York,
there might be some sort of federal claim, maybe for deprivation under color of law. Maybe there's some sort of 243 claim if I'm thinking about it really hard.
Yeah, because I know in New York, the attorney general is really a civil office and only have to handle civil matters. And rare occasions, they handle some criminal matters. But
I could try a 1983 claim because somehow they're acting under color of law, depriving me of a civil right. If I can try to squeeze this into civil rights interest.
Yeah, you have the right to life. Yeah, you could get it. The family probably could get it. But then you're talking about 19. But still. I think the loser, and I understand we're trying to figure it out, but I think it's a loser whenever you're talking about prosecutorial decisions and an office making a decision that you just don't agree with.
You'll never be able to get after the prosecutor for not prosecuting. That's basically borderline impossible.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might be able to get to the medical examiner.
You see, maybe I'm stupid, but when it's so egregious, I mean, I get it. And I don't expect the prosecutor to prosecute every time. Like, look, we can't make the case. There's just not enough there. Maybe later, whatever. But when things are pretty blatant to just about anybody's eyes that something happened, it starts to stink. I mean, it really starts to stink.
Yeah. So you're talking about the actual means. We're talking about you're talking about the outcome, not the means. But law is a means test, right? How are we getting there? You're talking about the ends, which is, you're right. It's bad, but we have to get there. And I think that's what standing does. It prevents you from getting to the actual facts. So,
and thus there may be a problem with that if you can't. I don't know.
I don't know. You're saying this stinks to me. If you're asking me whether or not justice is demanded here, we have the first and most critical question we have to ask is, what race is the victim? And then
see, I didn't even think to ask that question, Joe. I didn't think to ask what the race of any of the people were involved.
Bad news. I think she's white.
Oh, woman. So we still got that. Just like what happened in Virginia. Because you heard it in Virginia. Now she did the porn thing, put it on the streamed it, and now she's saying it's revenge porn. It's like, but you streamed it on a website. How is that revenge porn?
Yeah. Who uploaded it? Who uploaded it? Who took payment? Who was actually interacting with people giving payment? You're going to blame that on the Republicans and your enemies, right? You're the one doing this.
Have you guys heard about this story? The Virginia congresswoman?
I have.
I glanced at it and was like, yeah, I'm not covering this one right now.
Assembly member, Nate, don't give her a promotion. She's like going for the assembly.
Oh yeah, the assembly. Yeah, sure. The House of Delegates in Virginia.
So all right. So on this stream, I can ask, what's the story here?
Okay. There's somebody running to be a delegate. I don't think she is one, or she's running to be one, but essentially she has a side hobby, which is not an OnlyFans, but it's like other adult type of
content
where she interacts with readers performing sexual acts with herself or others and encouraging payment from said viewers that give her money. She's makes money off of essentially selling sexual
publicizing
acts or
publicizing her private her performances with her husband.
Here's the story is so her and her husband were making money on the side on a website like Pornhub, but it's called Chatterbait. And that website, you're able to live stream sex acts and get tips for doing it. So she's on the site, and you can see, and the video, which was still up on the site, says she'll say, "Hey, give me a coin," which costs maybe $100, whatever the coin costs, and she'll say, "Hey,
this.
Give me this, and I'll do this. I'll put whatever in my mouth or whatever." So that's what she'll do. So that was up on the site. She live streams it. They're making money, and then she decides she's going to run for Congress. They believe they took it down, but it's still on the site, and she runs for Congress. So the Republican operatives find it and then release it. So the Washington Post does a workup on it, and now she's saying that it's wrong because this was a sex. First she said it was a sex crime that they released the tape, and now they're saying that they released it because she's a woman, and they're trying to stop women from running for Congress.
Oh, it's misogyny.
Yes,
the
and
patriarchy.
The last thing is that it's what was the last thing? It was
revenge porn.
Revenge porn. So now that the issue is it revenge porn because you put it out there yourself, you live streamed it out there, but now there's more issues that come out. The issue that's come out now is that the site that she put it on is a site that allows you to live stream. So she live streamed it to like 5,700 people, but after that live stream is over, you're not supposed to record the live stream. So now they're saying, well, since there's a recording of the live stream, which is against the policies of the site, does that now still qualify as revenge porn? But
hold on, did she record it or did the site record it without her knowledge?
The site archives them, and other people recorded it and put it back up on the site. So now it's an issue of, well,
I don't know. It's a recorded broadcast.
Yeah, so that's kind of the issue. On these recorded broadcasts, are you allowed to, was someone allowed to do this or not? But I don't think she has a revenge porn issue. Like the revenge porn is ridiculous because she made it public herself.
I just didn't know Jack Murphy's wife was running for Congress. So that's very exciting.
Ouch.
I don't know if you're being cheeky, unbelievable, or what.
In this context, you're calling me cheeky, really?
Yeah, I know. I'm saying this chat.
Oh.
I wonder if they're being cheeky or not. They're saying do some research for God's sake before you get into it.
No, I think
they're being funny.
I think being funny.
I need to go investigate more seriously. But yeah,
do a lot more research on this topic.
Yeah.
So
we only need Viva here for him to do the discovery.
So this is the situation, right? So before you voluntarily give over money and she gets screwed, but if she gets into government, you have to turn over your money and you get screwed.
Yes, but she got paid to be screwed.
Right.
Right.
So
now she will be paid if she gets into government for us to be screwed. If you're in Virginia. If you're in Virginia.
Look, I'll admit, you guys maybe feel differently. I have zero sympathy for this woman. Zero. She did it. She got paid. She chose to, and people are sharing it. Anybody disagree or think that? Oh no.
I'm gonna open a GoFundMe for her. I feel terrible. This is just so terribly wrong. Like how it is that this is an obvious situation where the patriarchy is trying to control women.
She's being held accountable for her choices, and that's wrong.
No, exactly, precisely. I mean, for crying out loud, it's a woman.
Well, Joe, I definitely would encourage you to, work on your statement. We'll definitely have you share that at the end of the show. We can close on because I'm everybody would love to hear your thoughts.
Can we talk about the Colton County clerk with the book? I've been reading the book online. It's a work of glory.
Murdoch case?
Yeah, from Murdoch, the clerk of court who read the Murdoch verdict.
Oh,
she wrote a book. She wrote a book basically confessing to jury tampering. And in between breaks of the Ken Paxton impeachment trial, I've been reading sections of her book on stream.
Oh my God.
Ooh. So in the book, In the book, what are the most egregious examples you found so far of her engaging in jury tampering?
Well, she has some serious main character energy, I'll tell you that for sure. But yeah, she talks about interfacing with the jury and stuff like that. Would you like me to read you some of the book, which I paid for?
By all means. How much?
I'll read you $10.
$10, which was a complete tax deduction for you.
Yo, for sure.
What is it? The Kindle
at least
version?
if she's a clerk, at least she could send a certified copy.
This was.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there.
I particularly liked this paragraph of the book where she writes, quote, "For example, one juror started her monthly cycle, and I asked my executive administrative assistant, Polly Riley, to go and get some products for the juror.
What?
Polly was already one step ahead of me and said, wait a minute, I already have what you need tucked away for such a time as this. Polly saved the day."
Wow. Oh my God! And did she name the juror?
The writing just leaps off the page.
Oh my God! This hurts. This hurts.
Polly saved the day.
By the way, I have a Rumble rant I see that came in that I missed earlier. I apologize, Joe. The thought of you being inspired by the Church Commission slightly diminishes my high opinion of you. Mr. Entry required. And I missed a segment last night with your father. I like listening to him. I'm not sure why, but there you go. So back to our elevated reading to close out. Anything else you want to share from this? What are your opinions on it, Kurt? Should she be prosecuted criminally?
I'll tell you, there's definitely sufficient evidence at this point to have a hearing on it, and we need to get the jurors under oath and ask them what the hell happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's where I'd start. And obviously, I think it's readily apparent that it can't be the judge because he's one, biased, and two, he's a witness.
He's been biased. He's been biased for a very long time, in my opinion.
Yeah. So the Attorney General of the state ordered an investigation, so that's underway.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome, because this was I covered that trial, and
I did too.
That judge was just.
So the state response is due today, I think, right? To this motion to suspend the appeal and have a motion for new trial. I think the state's response is due. So it'll be interesting to see what they say.
I think I asked this before, though. What about double jeopardy concerns and things
double
like
jeopardy?
That?
Double jeopardy is designed to protect defendants from having to face prosecution twice. This is the defendant seeking to have hit the first judgment set aside and go for a second bite at the apple with hopefully an impartial jury. So double jeopardy is not at issue here.
Okay, so quick question then. Let's say, because I believe it is a death penalty state. What if we're going to roll the dice again, we get the new trial, and by the way, the jury comes back and says, you know what, you're guilty still, and capital punishment?
No, there was no death penalty charge. It wasn't in the original indictment. I think to do that, you'd have to go all the way back to the original indictment and reopen that. I'm not sure that's possible.
Okay.
There could be a superseding indictment, potentially. Potentially, there could be a superseding indictment, I would think. But
it's pretty hard not to view that as punitive for the defendant taking advantage of their right.
Yeah.
It looks suspiciously like retribution, which is not permitted.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
That's great.
Well, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I genuinely don't know. I mean, if there's a ceiling on it, like, okay, they cannot be punished anymore, or the sentence cannot be any higher than what they already received, or
that's a great question.
Or what it would be. I literally don't know that.
No, that's a great question.
Well, they already got the maximum sentence, so that's not an issue. But like hypothetically, you could get a higher sentence if you were like in a situation where you received less than before, because it would be open to the new judge to reassess in the new trial, because the sentencing would be based, at least in principle, off what the judge observed in this new trial, which wouldn't necessarily be different. One would hope.
Now, in this case, though, I mean, am I wrong to say it's really not a big threat anyway? Because didn't he get essentially?
He got double life. He already got the max.
No. I meant even if all that got tossed out, his financial crimes have already gotten him a life sentence too from all the corruption and this is only like one of a laundry list of things he's been convicted over, from what I understand. So
correct.
It's not like, oh my God, he's going to be walking out of prison.
I think he pled guilty on the financial crimes, from my recollection.
He did, but it might mean that he gets federal time instead of state time because of primacy. So because he has federal convictions in place, if the state conviction set aside, then the federal conviction would now have primacy in time. So it might mean he does his time federally, which is slightly better. So that's nice. Slight upgrade of facilities.
It's really a fight over how rough his cell facilities are going to be. That's what this entire trial ultimately is about, because he's spending the rest of his life in jail.
Okay, but me as a person saying, "Oh my God, I don't want this son of a bitch to get off from doing something because of chicanery," like Bill Cosby walked out of prison. He's out. No, as an example, this guy, it does salve the wounds a little bit to think, well, you know what? No matter what happens, the son of a bitch is going to be locked up for the rest of his life somewhere.
Yeah, it's just a question of where and what facility at this point. That's all that's really at issue.
I'll tell you this. My personal opinion after watching that trial was that he is evil and would literally steal from Forrest Gump's dumber brother. Like that's how terrible a person, how lacking in ethics he is, and yet I'm convinced he did not kill his wife and son.
Alarm off.
So, because I think it's forensic evidence which exonerates him. So I think he's a terrible human being. But as far as him being labeled a murderer for the rest of his life, I think that's inappropriate. So.
Okay, let's. I'm going to close out with this last super chat. If the trial was tampered with by the clerk, who is an agent of the government, couldn't that actually be grounds for double jeopardy to apply?
No, it's a structural error, so it's an automatic do-over. But that's all you get, right? Because he's the one asking for the new trial, as Joe pointed out. So, like, you have different kinds of error, but this would be a structural error because it's like you don't do a harmless error analysis, right? If you have the state directly interfering with a juror, that's a structural error. That's just a do-over. So, do not pass go.
He'd steal Forrest's box of chocolates.
I'm telling. No, look, I'll tell you. There was one guy who testified at the trial who he stole from. Like he represented, not just steal from him, but it's his own client that was suing basically suing him or his wife for it was his maid. He had a lifelong maid or he made for many years who tripped and fell under dubious circumstances, admittedly, and died. And she left behind this two sons, and one son got up there and testified, and the guy literally looked like Forrest Gump. I mean, you felt terrible for him because he was basically explaining how Murdoch himself told him that he can get like up to like $1 million for suing him. So he had him hire his own law firm to go after himself, which the conflicts of interest which abound here are astonishing. And then he didn't tell him that instead of there being only $1 million, he told him $1 million in insurance coverage. There actually was $5 million in insurance coverage, and he's entitled to his third. But it's like he didn't give him any portion of it when they ended up selling, I think, for $4.2 million. And that's what this kid who literally looked like Forrest Gump was talking about, how, like, he was claiming the case is still ongoing months after the case had already been decided and settled. And when they asked him, about his brother, he's like, yeah, he can't really testify because he's kind of slow. This was like, imagine Forrest Gump referring to someone else, that he takes care of him because, his younger brother is kind of slow. And that's why I said that. That's why I phrased it the way I did. Like, he literally would steal from the easiest victims out there, who practically living under his roof, and has no compunction about who he takes from because he's that evil a thief. But I just don't think he's a murderer. So
he's just standard soulless son of a bitch, not a murdering soulless son. Okay, fair enough. On that note, go ahead and wrap things up. Steve, where can folks find you?
Southern Law, it's right there on the screen. That's the channel. Had a good stream this morning with another local attorney and covered some cases, including a local one here that is unsolved that I hope the police can wrap up soon.
All right, Kurt, what's going on?
Yeah, you can find me at Uncivil Law. The last couple of days I've been covering the impeachment trial of Attorney General Ken Paxton, which has been incredibly interesting, and reviewing the evidence and trying to assess what's going on. And then, of course, the whole thing's political, so trying to figure that angle out is very interesting. But check out my channel, do a lot of Supreme Court analysis, court appeals analysis, true crime stuff, a little bit of everything. So see you there.
All right. And Joe, usually when he's here, will wrap up, tell us what he has going on, and then gives us a thought of the day.
Okay. So I'm Good Lawgic. My name is Joe. That's goodlogic.locals.com. Good Logic.
You got to say it right.
Good Logic.locals.com is where you can find me. You can figure out whether I'm on Eric Hunley or on Twitter Spaces or what time I'm streaming and things of that nature. In addition to covering humanities and philosophies and that other stuff, because I tend to stream every night or 6 nights a week in general. I try to do, and that's pretty much my deal. I cover politics a lot also, especially when it intercedes with the law. So there you go.
All right. You have no further thoughts of the day. So
what? Oh yeah, I'm opening up a Give Send Go for that poor woman there, because you can send to me at I'm going to be raising money for her legal fund there, and that's going to be at www.venmo.com/.